And you might have noticed we've got a lot of apple trees. We've got lots of fruit trees in general really, but it just means that we do a lot of apple pruning. We thought we'd share that with you today. So, is everybody happy to carry on in the rain? Yeah, good. Not much choice. So, when it comes to pruning apples, first things first, just some really basic housekeeping stuff. Apples are fantastic trees, but got quite a number of diseases that you can associate with them. So, one of the best things I can advise for you to do is, if you're coming to prune apples, is to make sure you've got clean, sharp tools. We'll even go to the extent of having some methylated spirits to clean our tools between trees. So it's very easy to transfer canker from one tree to another, or there are quite a few sort of bacterial and fungal infections that are very easy to spread, and you know, even birds can do it with the feet, but you don't want to add to that. So always start with a clean pair of secateurs, ideally clean between trees. If you're within the same orchard, normally it's all right, but you know, if I was going to prune something here and then at the other end of the garden, I'd definitely be thinking about wanting to clean the tools. Little think about your tools. So if you're pruning stuff this size, sort of pencil thickness, perhaps up to the thickness of your finger, secateurs are fine. If you're getting into this size, a little bit thicker, you probably want a pair of loppers or a small pruning saw. If you start getting to this size, you probably want to start thinking about a bow saw or perhaps even a chainsaw. And that's important, because if I try and cut this with this, it's not going to happen. And actually, if I try and force my way through, it's how accidents happen. So just really useful to think about that. Pruning in general of fruit, or apples certainly, can be divided into sort of three main categories. The first one is formative pruning. So you'll see this tree is what we call an espalier. So it's got a central leader and it's got these arms with the fruiting spurs on. You'll also see cordons, and you'll see fans on some of the cherry fruits. So obviously, when you're doing formative pruning, you're trying to grow this shape. So that's, you manipulate the plant and you're taking the leader out and you're encouraging those side growths to get this shape. And then when you've got this shape, you want to keep it. So then we move on to maintenance pruning, which I'm going to show you a little bit of now. After maintenance pruning, sometimes things go a little bit out of hand and a little bit sort of long in the tooth and down the road, like those trees there. We start getting to restoration pruning. So there are three main categories: formative pruning, maintenance pruning, and restoration pruning. So this is an apple tree. Now, this is one of the first ones we did our summer pruning on this year, so it's actually regrown quite a little bit. We probably started a little bit earlier than we should, and that's because we've got 200 trees to prune. But essentially, what you're looking to do is you're looking to maintain this form, because otherwise, very quickly, this will be, 2-3 years, this will easily be out here. Very vigorous growing trees. So what you're looking to do when you're doing your summer pruning is you find the current season's growth, which is this stuff. You can see it's very fresh, it's got the leaves on it. You can see the older growths. I've got these little lenticels on there, and you can just see it's a bit thicker. Looking for the current season's growth. And then what you want to do, if you look at the bottom of the leaf, and you might want to come in a little bit, if you look at the bottom of the leaf, the stem, you've got 2 or 3 leaves quite close together. That's called a basal whorl, and essentially it's a small concentration of leaves near the base. So you look for your basal whorl, and I'm sure Dale can show you as well, and you count up one or two buds, and then you make a pruning cut, pruning away from the bud like that, and that's it. Now, you need to do that dozens of times on each tree, but actually when you get started and you get your eye in, and you get to understand what you're doing, you can very quickly move through your tree and do your maintenance pruning to a fairly decent standard. We'll come back and clear that up later. But essentially what you've now got is there's air and light can get in then to your fruits and to your branches, and it just reduces any problems that you might have with the various diseases that you've got. So that's about keeping this to the shape that you want to keep it. And you can use similar tactics with pears, and again, it doesn't matter that this is an espalier. This would work on a cordon as well. It'd be absolutely fine on step overs like you've got behind you. The very same principles apply. You usually, in terms of when you do this, it's usually when the growth's at about pencil thickness or approaching pencil thickness, and you can actually feel it quite firm. There's not much bend in it. At the ends there's a little bit of bend, but actually here there's very little bend. And that's usually when you want to prune it, and that's typically, it varies from cultivar to cultivar and whereabouts you are in the country, that'll typically be something we'd start to do in sort of June time, mid-June, something like that. The reality is we start a little bit earlier because we've got so many trees to get through. We have to make a bit of a start on it. So that's maintenance pruning. Any questions on maintenance pruning? The fruit on wood that's at least a year old, usually and older. So this young growth won't produce growth any apples this year, but will start to bud up for next year. The problem is that every year this grows. You know, you're going to get a few apples here, a few apples, and then obviously the weight of the apples will pull the tree down. So what you're trying to do is concentrate as much old wood as possible into a tight space, but still have fruit. And the way you do that is by encouraging what we call spurs. So the technique I showed you back there actually encourages. So there's probably a year's growth there, a year's growth there, a year's growth there. Now this has actually got fruit buds on there, but the actual amount of space it takes up, the real estate it takes up, is compacted into that little spur there, which is much better than having something this long. So you build up these spur systems, and it's the spur systems each year. These are fruit buds here, that's a fruit bud. So in spring they'll blossom, you get these lovely blossoms, and then they'll produce apples. This one's already been harvested, and we've had the fruit from it. But over time, as with anything, we get problems with spurs getting a little bit congested, and that can mean congested in that they're growing into each other. And I think we did a thin on this last year, so it's not a really good example. But sometimes you might have got two spurs that are too close to each other. Like these are a little bit tight. That one's a little bit tight in there. So what you can do is you come back in winter. So once the leaves have dropped off, and it's a job that we typically do after Christmas, so in sort of January or February, once the leaves have dropped off and the sap is down, you go in with make some bigger cuts to remove entire spur systems. And it might be because the spurs have become overstretched and they're reaching out of the shape and you want to start again, or because they're growing into a neighbouring spur system. So you take the whole thing out right back to the branch. Or you could look individually at the spur system itself and ask the question, do I have too many fruit buds? Because what can happen is, say we've got a fruit bud here, it may well be that the apple sort of forms on this side. So ideally you want them to be hanging fairly free. So you can sometimes look at your spur systems and go, well, I'll try and find a good example. This tree's behaving itself. Oh, here we go, we've got three. See how we've got three really close together? And then we've got another one here and another one here. And if all of those buds flowered and set fruit, you'd have this cluster of apples with no air between them. So for me, I'd be really tempted to say, well, actually, I'm going to take out that one, and I'll probably take out that one. I think I knocked that one off by accident. So actually, I'm down to two now. And actually I'll get two good fruits there that can probably hang independently and not have three or four little crappy ones that are all sort of butting up to each other. So that's spur thinning. So you can have just thin the bud, or you can actually take the entire little bit of growth out. Does that make sense?
You do that in winter as well.
That's a winter job, so you definitely wouldn't want to do that. You wouldn't be able to do it in summer or spring, because in summer they'd be in flower. In spring they'd be in flower. In summer you'd have apples on there. This is definitely a job that you do once the leaves have dropped. It's a bit colder. So again, we normally do it sort of January, February.
What is the latest time that you do that?
You can get away with it sort of into March, but as soon as you start seeing those buds start to open for your blossoms and your leaves, it's a sign that your sap's up. And you'd still probably get away with small cuts, but as soon as you start doing anything a bit bigger, your tree's going to bleed, and it's just not good for the tree. So you tend to do this kind of more renovation style, larger cut pruning when the sap's down.
But no earlier than January.
No, you could probably start in December. What you're looking for is basically the tree to have dropped all its leaves, and then just give it a few weeks, a few frosts, and for the tree to go fully dormant. But yeah, we've definitely started this as early as late November, so there's a good window there to get you through. And the other thing you'd be looking to do as well is look for any diseased wood, any crossing wood, any wood with pests on. It was a joke. Disease wood, dying wood, crossing wood, any wood that's just in the way, that's the time to do it. And what this does is, again, it just ensures that when you get your summer growth on there, it's not too congested. You've got nice, evenly spaced spurs, fruiting that got a nice amount of air and light around them, and can ripen unhindered, if that makes sense. Any questions on winter pruning? So that's basically getting the tree to the form you want it to, and then you do your maintenance pruning to sort of keep it that way. And this tree is a good example. So we looked at espaliers earlier, and in a moment we're going to look at cordons. But this tree is a good example of an open-centred tree. So you can see it's very clearly been trained to have 3 equally spaced branches that go off in opposite directions, which then in turn bifurcate into the green growth and the apples themselves. And the old saying was that you should be able to throw a hat through the centre, or a pigeon should be able to fly through the centre unhindered. And again, what this does is it just opens up the tree, and you've almost got like a hollow donut sort of thing happening in the canopy, and that just allows a bit more light and a bit more air to get into the tree itself, and it just promotes that good vigour, that good health, that good hygiene, keeps the air moving, so you don't get quite as many problems with those sort of airborne pathogens and what have you. So so this is a really good example. This tree was really well, and if you look round, most of them have got very similar. I mean, you can have to work with what you've got and where the buds are on the tree, but they've got very similar, nice open centres. They've been pruned well, these ones. And then, as you go further up the tree, you'll see it bifurcates out, and you get the canopy. Now, there are a few problems with these orchards, and we're definitely going to need to do some work this year. Some of them are that it's kind of growing into the next tree a little bit, so we haven't really got that separation, that airflow that we'd like between the trees. Quite congested. There's definitely bits of dead wood up there and bits of split wood. You start looking a little bit closer, you can see things like on here, you've got this lateral tear, which again, you've got another one on the side. The tree will live fine, but you know, when you start making decisions about if you're going to thin a canopy, you definitely want to start with looking at things like that lateral tear. If you've got good wood next to it, you'd obviously want to keep the good wood. It's a really easy decision to make. And again, you want to try and thin the canopy a little bit so that a bit of air and light can get in there. And also it makes it easier to get up and harvest as well. Now what's really important when you're renovating old trees, and like before, you always take out dead wood, diseased wood, any damaged wood, so like that's cracked or torn, or you know, is looking like it could go at any minute. Always going to be a priority. But what you need to think about is the amount that you take out of your tree as well. So the old RHS advice used to be no more than a third in any one year. That's a third of this entire canopy. When you think about it, it's quite a lot. That's probably equivalent of taking one of these entire branches out and everything that goes beyond it. And I've been on various pruning courses myself over the years, and I've heard that number vary quite wildly. And I think the RHS, to be fair, have revised that number down a little bit. But I think the truer number is probably nearer to 10% per year. And the problem that you have is that trees, well, any living plant really, the sort of the leaves and the shoots in the canopy are in equilibrium to the amount of root that's in the ground. So if you were to chop off a major root under the ground, you'd definitely see some effect up in the canopy. Something would die back. And the same is true if you take off quite a lot of dead wood. Well, there's still that root pressure pushing into the tree, and that has to go somewhere. And the way the tree deals with that is by growing what we call water shoots, and these are these sort of almost dagger straight up shoots that go straight up. Now this tree is probably pruned a little bit too heavy one year, which is why we've got these water shoots, and there are a few more in other places I've noticed. And I'm guessing at some point someone's probably got up there with a chainsaw and took some rather large cuts out, and this is the tree's response to that. So water shoots. So actually water shoots can be useful. I'll tell you about the good before the bad. So you can still prune these into spurs. There's no problem there. You just reduce them like we did before, and eventually you can get fruit on these. And also they can actually become another branch. So if this branch was to become damaged by the lawnmower going past or something, you could possibly even pull one over and use it as a replacement shoot. However, I have to caveat that and say that the way that trees grow is that these branches, these older branches, are sort of integral to the core wood. So trees tend to be living cylinders around a dead centre that basically acts like a drinking straw, but it also provides the structure for the tree. And if they grow together, that union is really strong and almost unbreakable. But with these shoots, these tend to be dormant buds that live in the vascular cambium that respond and grow if there's damage, and because of that they're only sort of skin deep, which means they aren't anywhere near as strong. So if you were to train one of these in as a replacement shoot, you could very much expect that eventually it might pull itself loose and sort of leave the right word, wrench itself off just because of pure weight. So not completely useless, but when you come into making pruning decisions, try and keep your good core wood if you can, because it'll tend to be a bit stronger. And if you look, I think that's probably an old water shoot. That really big one there, you see it going straight up. Yeah, that's probably an old water shoot that's done its thing. And I think we've already earmarked that dale for this year, aren't we? We're going to probably take that one out because it'll do 2 or 3 things. It'll open up the centre for us. We know that that's not as strong as the other trees, and you can see it's going straight off the branch. It's not going with the flow, if that makes sense. So we'll take that out and then we'll put it on the ground.
And we don't really want apples up there, do we?
Ideally not.
You know, like 20 foot away from us, so it's not ideal.
So then back to percentages. So that's why we honour this percentage thing. What's really tricky if you're barrowing your clippings away to the compost heap as you work, it's really hard to gauge that 10%. So what I always suggest you do is you start doing your pruning, you start with your dead, diseased, damaged wood, and then start doing your more selective for shape pruning. Pile it up at the side of the tree, because it's a lot easier then to stand back, look at the canopy, and just make a bit of a judgment and say, is that 10%? Oh, have I gone to 20? I better stop. Or no, I'm only at 5. Let's keep going at it. So sometimes renovating a tree might need 5-6 years, and you might need to go, that's my 10% for this year. Next year I'm going to do that one, and then that, and then So I've certainly done trees that took me 5-6 years to get to a kind of state where I'm happy. But again, don't throw the wood away. The wood can be useful. I mean, some of this, if you take it off at the right time of year, could be used as scion wood. So if you're grafting, and I think Alan's doing a demonstration later on grafting, this absolutely could be used for grafting onto a rootstock, so that you've got a new tree. The thicker stuff burns lovely. If you want to season it and then use it on a barbecue, it'll actually add flavour to your meat. Or you can get it chipped and shredded, and that's another way to add flavour. I know that you pay a fortune now in the posh garden centres for apple chippings and peach tree chippings to flavour your meat. So why not take that opportunity? But again, great for nature. If not, you can pop that somewhere in the woodland, or we've got colleagues that like to do wood turning and stuff. An apple apparently is really nice for wood turning. I don't know, I've not done it myself. But I always like to use everything, especially if it's free, and otherwise it's just going to be wasted. So that's renovation pruning. I mean, I've just given you a very whistle-stop sort of run through, but has anybody got any questions on renovation pruning?
Does it matter?
Regulate the amount of top growth, and it's all relative. So actually, if you've got a really vigorous tree, you can still take 10%. If you've got a teeny little tree that's been super dwarfed on a M27 or whatever, then you still only want to take 10%. So yeah,
The ratio stays the same.
I think so, yeah. And right, it's a very rule of thumb thing as well. So with some of things like bramleys, you could probably take a little bit more. So some trees are more vigorous than others. Hate to say it, but Google's your friend. Just if in doubt, and that advice changes all the time. And I know that every year before we start doing our pruning season, we'll just go and check that what we think is right is still right, because especially organisations like the RHS are really good at doing research and trials and listening to the experts, and quite often they'll come back and say, actually our advice was this, but now we think this is better advice, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm quite happy to trust them and let them do the work in it. You know, it's in their interest to promote good plant health. It's what they do. So I always go and check, and if nothing else, it serves as a reminder. Make sure that you've got got it still right in your head before you start pruning. Yes. So in this one space you've got 8 varieties. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got 9 varieties in just this little what is it? 7 or 8 metre space. Yes, you're not going to get as many apples as you would from a bigger tree, but actually if you wanted a dessert apple, a cooking apple, a good eating apple, and then a good storing apple, you know, for the end of the season, it's a good way to pack in several varieties into a short space, and they actually look quite good on the wall. I think, you know, that's the good thing about apples. So bleak corners, you can get them that are just a single stem like this, or you can get what we call a U-cordon, which looks like if you imagine like a tuning fork effect, and then you can get double U-cordons that is like a tuning fork on top of a tuning fork, if that makes sense. And then if you start looking at some of these sort of huge nose French pruning techniques and things, there are all kinds of elaborate designs and twirling. Some fantastic ones at places like Audley End and West Dean and a few others that Bridgewater, yeah. So you can definitely find really good examples. And the reason is really interested in why they're on an angle, because that usually comes up. So if you grew them straight up, again back to plant hormones. If the plant goes straight up, it tends to put on leafy growth, stems and leaves. But actually, if you look at the fruit that fruits on a tree, and it's why we have espaliers like that, the way you get the fruit is where the arms are actually level, and again it changes up the plant hormones, and it takes it from producing green vegetative growth into more flower and fruit growth. So this sort of does the best of both worlds. It allows a little bit of vegetative growth, but there's just enough angle on there that it can set fruit buds and give you best of both worlds. And much like the espaliers that we looked after earlier on, I'm probably going to get wet doing this, but here you go. See, this one we haven't worked last year, and you can really tell. So you see how congested it is. It's probably too congested, and actually the leaves are almost gone. I'll probably be all right to thin this a little bit, but some of them are really. We probably need to come up with a saw and take some of these bigger ones out, and actually really go to town thinning this out. But yeah, I mean, I'm looking at this now. I'm probably thinking I want to take something off like this, and then maybe even that one. Again, I should be doing loppers with this, but you see how that's just it's just opened it up a little bit. And these will respond, it's fine, there's no problems there. And then again, if I was looking at this again, obviously I've got 3 fruit buds here. I'd be tempted to perhaps just take that middle one out maybe. That'll fruit either side like this. But again, we'd summer prune these, and we have summer pruned them. We do use volunteers to summer prune, so we get a bit of a variation. Some will summer prune to 1 bud, some will do to 3, some will do to 6. But we're really lucky to have volunteers, and we definitely couldn't do it without them. So we just try and keep a bit of an eye on it, don't we, Dale? And sometimes we'll sneak in after hours, won't we, and just tidy a few bits up. But yeah, again, you see how congested this one is. It really needs us to come back this winter and thin some of those spurs out, so we get nice productive spurs. Any questions?
That's the tree that's quite a good example of how not to do it.
Oh yeah, you do that bit then, Dale. Show them that one.
So
You get your legs wet.
going back to what Dean was just saying about people need to be brave when you're doing your summer pruning and taking it down to those 3, at least, well, at most even, and knocking it back, and people get quite nervous about taking all this foliage off. You're actually doing the tree no good by leaving it on. And a good example of that is this tree here, which I think has been badly pruned probably for about 3-4 years, unfortunately. Probably because we're getting to the end of pruning, about 4 weeks in a row. But basically here, look how far this branch has got out, and the apples are going to be forming all the way out from the wall, which is just, that's not what we want. We want them as close to the branch as possible. So if we look at this one, you can actually go back and you can see the previous, and look how enormous that is, that cut that's been left there. That should be that big. And actually incrementally, that's only 3 years that's been left. And actually it could have been 3 years, it could be there. So these have been left really long, and actually all these are very long. And actually what you're doing is you're shortening the lifespan of the whole spur, because eventually, I mean, this can't go on, so eventually that's going to have to be taken off, and we're going to have to try and hopefully break another spur. But you can actually read the legacy of the prunes, so you can go back quite some years and see other people's prunes. So you're always leaving your mark on that tree, especially that these are partly ornamental, aren't they? It comes from France and their lovely posh gardens and things, and showing how much power we have over nature and how we can control them. So a big part of it is actually doing, yeah, that's just a really good example.
Where you're an apple tree.